Welcome everyone. This is the live virtual roundtable event where we'll discuss elevating your DEI programs and beyond in 2023. I'm your moderator, Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting, a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago. Halo was founded in April of 2020 to provide the process-oriented best practices. Our team developed a top executive search firms with a risk-free, cost-effective fee model tailored for early stage and high growth startups for their most critical hires. If you're new to this event, Halo hosts monthly virtual roundtable events like this one for HR, tech, and DEI leaders on a variety of topics. Don't forget to check out the Halo series and Halo mini series, where we hear from executives taking a deep dive into what is keeping them up at night. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A function, and we'll address those questions throughout the session. Early next week, we will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will post a recorded version of this event to our YouTube channel early next week. Today, we are joined by a passionate and fantastic group of DEI strategists and practitioners. We want this to be an interactive session, so along the way, please ask questions using the Q&A function. First, I'd like to introduce Nina Bryson Fleming. Nina is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Sovos Compliance, where she leads a DEI strategy across EMEA and the Americas. She aims to create equity for all employees and aligns internal and external audiences on DEI, belonging, and corporate social responsibility. Nina holds various DEI certifications and is involved in several diversity councils. She launched the Sovos Women's Alliance and supports early career women in tech. Recently, she was recognized as a top 50 women in tech by the Tech Inclusion Council. Nina grew up in South Carolina, holds an MBA from University of Maryland, and a BBA in marketing from Prairie View A&M University, and she currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband, Damon. Thank you for joining us, Nina. Our next panelist is Nickoria Johnson. Nickoria is a partner and the Chief Diversity Officer at Credera. As a Chief Diversity Officer, she is responsible for accelerating the mission of amplifying voices of underrepresented groups and synergizing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts toward unified goals to ensure accessibility, focus, and visibility of DE&I for the firm. Nickoria is a seasoned industry leader with over 25 years of experience in leading global digital transformation efforts and scaling technology to support dynamic business outcomes. Outside of the office, Nickoria is a passionate advocate for girls in STEM and enjoys mentoring and coaching a student dance team in her spare time. We're excited to have you, Nickoria. Next, I'd like to introduce Angela Roseboro. Angela is an award-winning DEI and culture strategist, specializing in consulting within the tech industry. With nearly 3 decades of experience in building human capital strategies, Ms. Roseboro has a reputation as an influential culture transformation leader. She has worked for Fortune 500 companies such as Dropbox and Riot Games, where she was credited with being the key architect behind the company's culture evolution. She has received numerous honors for her leadership and DEI work, including being named Black Enterprise's 150 top D&I executives and Savoy Magazine's most influential Black corporate executives. Ms. Roseboro is currently a board member for Coursera and serves on the advisory board for the Black Collegiate Gaming Association and Go Red for Women National Leadership Council. She earned a bachelor's degree in human resource management from Roosevelt University and currently resides in Las Vegas with her family. We're happy to have you, Angela. Lastly, we are joined by Sharra Owens-Schwartz. Sharra is the first ever global diversity leader for Rocket Software. As the Vice President of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity, she is leading the charge to create an organizational culture where equity is the bias for each person finding belonging and where employees are truly valued for their unique perspectives. The daughter of the first Black state senator in Massachusetts, Sharra has a lifelong commitment to advancing equity and works to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in her personal life as well. She chairs the Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee at Belmont Day School and is a member of the Board of Advisors for Massachusetts Technology Leaders Council, Boston Area DEI Forum, and Making Our Strong Communities Stronger DEI Collaborative Initiative. Sharra earned a Bachelor's of Arts from Bethune Cook University, an MBA in Social Impact Management from Brandeis University, and a certificate in Diversity and Inclusion from Cornell University. She's a frequent speaker on DEI topics, particularly in the technology industry. Great to have you on the panel, Sharra. So before we dive into the questions, I'd like to provide some context on the progress that diversity, equity, and inclusion has made over the past few years. In March of 2020, Breonna Taylor was shot by Louisville police officers, and in May of 2020, George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police, sparking a global movement. In 2021, DEI was at the forefront of senior leadership, really starting to dig into metrics and data and starting to take action, really focused on how it's impacting the business and spend. And at this point, employees were really seeking action from senior leadership. And this past year, this year should have been focused more around leveling and building upon the foundation. However, with DEI fatigue and the nature of the economy, many companies have reduced or even eliminated the budget for DEI spend. So the focus has, really been positive impact for DEI and how it impacts your company culture and employee engagement. And this is really an area that individuals need to be careful not to slow down the journey itself, but really still investing in your people and investing in DEI, which directly impacts the business. Before we jump into the questions, any context from the panel that they'd like to add? All right, let's.
Sounds good, Doug. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and jump.
I would just say that made me sad. when you talked about that just made me sad because we've been doing this work and passionate for so many years. But I'm excited to have the conversation.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into the first question. What are DEI strategies, or why are DEI strategies important, and what impact does it have on the bottom line? Nina, do you mind kicking us off?
Be glad to. DEI is a business imperative. And I think that, as you mentioned, in 2020 and 2021, companies realized that. And that's why they expanded their DEI efforts. And what we know is that when DEI is supported and resourced properly, it has an impact on the bottom line. And it has an impact on retention and engagement and innovation. And all those things build to a business case that we've discussed time and time again. It is beyond the doubt that when DEI has strategies and they're supported by the organization and they're embraced, then we absolutely have a positive effect. Now, one important aspect to understand is, as you also mentioned, a lot of companies are pulling back that support right now, whether that be in people or budget, or just simply incorporating it throughout the organization. And when companies do that, it is going to take them a lot longer to realize these successes. And what I would want people to understand is it's not that DEI is not incapable of giving these results. We need the people, we need the budget, we need the support, and hands down, there is a positive impact on the bottom line when these things actually happen.
Yeah, and I'd love to add a little bit of color to that. I agree with everything you said, Nina, and it's kind of hard to have to go out and continue to sell DE&I. You would hope by now people realize the value. One of the things that helps me when I'm talking to clients is that, the market and the population and how the dynamics of households are changing. And so to be able to speak into an environment where 52% of households are either blended or multicultural here in the US, you have to have that perspective inside of your four walls. And so that's just something else to add that sometimes people don't speak about. If you're in services, if you're providing products, that's super important to understand marketing, how to integrate multicultural insights. The best place to get that is with your internal employees.
I agree again with everything that everybody said. I think as I look back over the last 2 years when we did see the uptick of chief diversity officers in droves in 20 and 21, I think there's two ways companies view DEI and the work that we do. One is something that they have to fix, or it's an opportunity that unleashes them, as Nina talked about, and all the benefits of that. And I think it's really important that when you decide that this is the path that you want to go, and I think time and time again, we talked about this, that always having to prove the business case. I don't hear the same when you're putting together a marketing strategy or a technology strategy, but with a DEI strategy, you have to show why this adds value. I think a company should be very aware of that before they start down this road. And if we look at it as something that we have to fix, then that's really short-sighted, because then when they think it's fixed, then you start to see the backdrop of people getting, you start to see them retract resources. But if you see it as this opportunity, and we all know that there is, as you know, Nickoria and Nina has said, then you're always looking to be innovative. You're always looking to understand who your customers are. And I would really challenge organizations to see and view it that way, even though I think some of the work that we do is uncomfortable. And it then allows us to lean into the discomfort, because there is that too, of the work that we do. But if I see it as an opportunity, something that is unleashing me and unleashing our employees and my talent, then it's a strategy that I know will increase my bottom line. And I got to believe that when I go into driving DEI in my company.
I agree with each of the panelists here. And, you know, I see this question come up time and time again within organizations. And I too am fatigued of the question and wish that we could move beyond this. And I know that we are not there yet. And so I want to point out a really critical element where organizations sort of trip up. They think about diversity, right? And that is important, but it's often, oh, we have to make our organization more diverse. And so they're telling folks, make sure we have panels that are diverse. And so let's get folks in. But what they fail to do is look at what's going on inside the organization. And the way that I think about it and I approach this work is that it really starts with the equity piece. If you look at your processes, your structures, right? And we could spend a lot of time on this, right? Because we are oftentimes what organizations are doing is bringing people in who had never been a part of the organization and trying to make them fit. But that's not what equity is. That's not what to succeed in that environment. But we need to really look at and disrupt some of the ways that we do things, right? So it opens the door to truly create these inclusive environments, right? And then we won't have the diversity issue. People will see what you're doing in the organization and will want to be a part of it. So thinking about diversity is great, and it needs to be a part of the whole picture. You're not going to all of a sudden start making better decisions because your table the participants in your table look a little different. They have to belong and know that their perspectives are actually being valued. They can participate. So these are things that we all think about in this space, and in the challenges around the bottom line. Absolutely, you'll succeed if you pay attention to these things in conjunction with one another.
From a hierarchy structure and reporting perspective, who is responsible for DEI within the organization, and what approach has the group found to have shared accountability among the DEI practitioners? Sharra, would you like to weigh in on this question?
Sure. I'll jump in, and you know, it's really interesting. The short answer to that question is that it's everyone's responsibility. And to speak earlier to some things that have been said, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion needs to be a business imperative. in order for it to be successful, right? It is a top-down, bottoms-up approach. And if you don't have the buy-in of your CEO, you will not be successful in making that large-scale change. You need the investment of time, you need the investment of money, and role models, really, at the highest levels of your organization. And so the most successful DEI change makers have strong relationships with whoever it is who's leading the organization. And there needs to be alignment in the mission, in the values, in the desired outcomes. So we can drill down deeper into that, but really it's everyone. It doesn't sit on the shoulders of that individual. And I think that's something that often happens in organizations.
I totally agree, Shar. I think when you come into an organization, like Angela's here, she's going to fix everything. And it's like, it's on our shoulders to do. I have reported into a chief people officer and I've reported into a CEO. And I can tell you that I got faster results sitting at the table with the CEO, because ultimately the CEO is the person that unblocks you. The CEO is your partner. And when I joined Riot, I said to the CEO, look, you and I have to be in sync. And we have to hear each other. And if there ever come a point where you can't hear me and I can't hear you, then we have to be done, right? And so, and I said that because the importance of that relationship is so strong. And if that CEO is not role modeling what we should be doing and talking about it, then I think it sends a signal to how serious an organization is. I think most times they are in the HR function. And honestly, I think that's short-sighted, because the work that we do not only touches workforce, we touch marketing, we touch technology, we touch policy, we touch communication. And so if you see it as a strategic imperative, where you have to have relationships with all of those business leaders, I think the natural place where it should fit is with that CEO. I think we have gone to the point where we think it's just about the diversity component, where it's about workforce, when it's really about, if you truly are about the business case of this. And at Riot, I was sitting at our creators meetings, our esports meetings, every meeting I was in, and every leader had to own their component, but I was that strategic advisor for them. And I think we got results very quickly because I sat at that table and it didn't have to be filtered through someone else to have my voice there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's something to exactly what Sharra said. How do you create this perspective that DEI is everyone's challenge to contribute to? I think that having goals and metrics down at the business unit level is very important. And if you can get to the place where it hits you in the pocketbook as well, that's really helpful to continue to drive it out as truly a business imperative. We have those types of incentives and things for other aspects of your business. I think when you're able to translate that into the DE&I space, that's also helpful as well.
And I'd just like to add one aspect, because there was one sentence that was said that I really want to amplify. Inclusion is about our employees, whichever way they show up to work, having a seat at the table. In order for us to get to that organizationally, DEI needs that seat at the table. So if there are meetings that are happening where DEI is not present, then DEI very well may not be being incorporated. And so it's very important, when we want that cultural change, then we've got to have the right people at our tables when we're making decisions.
Great, thanks, Nina. Moving on to the next question, what is the importance of mentoring and how can it be used as a tool to provide exposure and opportunities for diverse employees to further their careers? Nickoria, can you share with the audience the importance of mentoring and providing exposure for diverse employees to help accelerate their careers?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an area I'm very passionate about. I don't know about how everyone else was raised, but I was kind of raised to keep my head down and let my work speak for me. I think we all know that that does not exactly work in most workplaces, right? You have the power of an internal network can either be advantageous to you or disadvantageous to you if you don't have one. And so looking at it from a systematic perspective, when you have cultures and people and different identities that may not be these confident self-advocates, how do you create those structures? And I believe you can do that through mentoring. Mentoring and creating those dynamics and those conversations will enable more people to speak into this person's career path, number one. Number two, in those performance conversations behind closed doors, stepping up and being an advocate and a mentor because you're deeply known. And so I think mentoring provides that opportunity for people across all different types of identities within our space.
Any context from the rest of the group?
I'll weigh in. Just to amplify your words, Nickoria, I think it's vitally important. And, particularly for women, women of color, for people of color, it's really important. You have these sort of informal networks that are formed in organizations, and oftentimes white men will have access to these networks, and it's, going out for beer or whatever it is, socially going over to each other's houses, and there are groups of people that don't have access to those. So I look at mentoring, absolutely. Sponsorship is really critical, and they can be both. Someone who's your mentor can also be your sponsor. But really what you're talking about, Nickoria, is having somebody in those rooms where you are not present, who knows you and knows what you're doing, to get you in front of folks who you otherwise may not have had access to. So I think mentorship, sponsorship is really critical in careers.
And one other point that I wanted to add, I'm sorry, Angela, I'll defer to you in just 1 second. I think the one other point that I would add is it is great when you can have a mentor who looks like you, but you also need mentors who are not like you. And you can have more than one. It's not cheating on them to have more than one. And really, you need to invest in trying to get your network.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I remember early in my career going into a workforce, and I'm from the South Side of Chicago, the first person to go to college in my family, and going into a bank that first day with all of these folks, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know how to move. And I knew I was smart and capable, but I was just unfamiliar in my environment. And it was a mentor that I could go to and say, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? And they were so influential in helping me navigate something that was so foreign that I could have just retreated inside of myself instead of really kind of being my best self. And so I have a board of directors, and I still have them to the day where, to your point, there are different people from different spaces that I can call. And hopefully this group will be one for me as well. We can call and go, girl, I'm going through this thing. Like, how should I navigate this? And if you don't have someone that you feel connected to in that way, that you can ask the tough questions and in a safe environment, it made all the difference of how I showed up in an organization. And I just would say, for those of you who don't have a mentor early in your career, call one of us, do something, because we've gone through some stuff, I'm sure. And we want to help people navigate. It is now my duty to help others. And Nickoria, you're doing a great job of this, of just helping young women understand their footing and be able to be who they are, because sometimes you just don't have the words, right? And so I think it's vitally important.
Thanks, everyone. Moving on to the next question. Oh, all right. It looks like we had a question submitted to the Q&A. So the question is, what would be a recommended starting point for implementing a mentoring program in my organization, and how have you seen change within the organization?
I can take at least a portion of that. So a lot of folks might not have enough mentors to go around, and whatever that means, whether that means enough senior people to attach to junior people. If you are trying to spin up programs within communities, you may not have enough senior to match to junior. We implemented mentoring circles first as a source of, number one, matching an executive with a small pool of people. 4 to 5, meet for a year, have a curriculum that we created that speaks into the dynamics of that group, whether that's within our women's network or our people of color network. But then the interesting thing that happens in doing that is that there's peer coaching that goes around, right? So you get the advantage of that senior mentor with the junior folks, but you also get the advantage of really deep relationships amongst the peer group. So I would say start there. And then also the next thing is, think about the curriculum that matters for your organization, right? Mentoring circles where all the pressure is on the mentor to provide individualized topics and coaching is hard. If you can take the challenges you're seeing in your organization or the things that this community needs and create, monthly curriculum, even if it's just a series of discussion guides, that's really helpful. And I think a good starting place where you can't build out that one-to-one in your environment.
So I'm going to say something controversial, maybe. I have not seen where formal mentoring programs have had the output that I've wanted them to have. Where I have seen that have worked, it's like people, they get together for 6 months and then they just don't connect again. I love what Nickoria is saying. I try to make it more organic. So I try to be a connector of people. Like if I see someone like, oh, you should get to meet that person. And I'm not saying mentoring programs don't work, but I am saying that I've not seen it where it got the output that I've wanted it to have. I've seen more success when I go, hey, Josh, I'm going to connect you with Mark. And Mark, go to lunch with Josh. And then it becomes an organic relationship. And Mark's he's a leader on the senior leadership team. And now Josh, because he now knows Mark, and we all know how that relationship works. Now Josh is seen in the organization and he's moving up. And so I try to facilitate those connections. And I do love the mentoring circles, because again, I think that would have been very helpful for me just to understand how to get a mentor and how I show up as a mentee.
Great, thanks everyone. Looks like we had another question come in just now. Angela, can you elaborate on what you were not seeing?
So I'm not seeing the continued relationship because it's programmatic. And so we okay, it's going to be for 6 months. And then the mentees don't really know what to ask. And then the leaders are a little bit hesitant. And even though we take them all through training, it's pretty awkward at first. And so we go through it and then we say, hey, they've gotten some good information, but the output that I want from mentoring is I want folks to really have an understanding of how to navigate, particularly women and people of color in organization. And so I use mentoring to help us be able to do that. And so the formal mentoring, that's what my outcome is. And I hadn't seen that work. I know when it works because I sit in the talent reviews and talent succession planning, and I'm looking to see if the mentor is going to start to bring up the mentee. And that happens maybe 1 or 3 times. But I have seen when I'm like, you know what, Mark, go talk to Josh, and he'll bring up Josh. So I think if you're going to construct it, and I think maybe we just need to relook and rebuild about, reimagine what mentoring can be and what we want the outcome to be. Then maybe we can really make it an organic kind of feel for folks. Programmatically, it just didn't connect. And so if others have seen it work, I am all ears. But we did 6 months pilots, a year pilot, and they would meet and nothing would come of it, and they wouldn't even have the relationship built. So I would say reimagine it to what you want the outcome to be, and whether you call it mentoring or mentoring circles or connections, my goal is that they get to know the leaders so that the leaders are speaking about them when they're not in the room, as Sharra said. hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Angela. And this next question, we're going to start off with your response to this question. What are some approaches that teams can take to begin working in a collaborative manner between the DEI and HR functions, given that the HR practices are often built without input from the DEI committee?
Ooh, this is the question for the ages. I think it is all there, in my experience, there have been this tension between DEI and HR and sometimes. And I start to think about why does that happen? And I think if we are totally aligned with what we're doing, and one of the things that I've noticed is that some of the HR practitioners are operationally focused, and we're much more about culture and transformation focused. And so how do you build those two things together? One of the things I decided to do was, I think I made an assumption that if I'm in the HR function, that everyone knew DEI, and that was just not true. So I usually start with the business. I educate the business first. That's been my go-to. And I never came back to educate HR because I just assumed we're in this together. And so what I started to do is pull HR in first. What are our roles? What are our responsibilities so that we're aligned? And even though there is an operational component, we're part of that as well. So making sure that I start there internally versus going to the business, which is what I typically try to do first, I think has been a help. I also think that if you're leading an HR function, and I had a conversation with a CHRO, she's going to be hiring for a chief diversity officer. I'm like, well, what does success looks like for the work one? And she didn't know. And so what I think happens in that situation is that you have a really good expert that comes in and they're driving, and you have a person who doesn't really know what they want this role to do. And so they're just reacting to what the person's doing. So I think it's super important that if you are leading a HR function, that you have clear expectations and clear accountabilities of what you want that CDO to be and do, and that you partner together to do that. And if an HR person is really good at processes and systems, and that's great. And then you have this group, this CDO who's really good at culture and strategy. That should be, to me, an explosive team. You should be able to change the world with that team. And I think that's how we should go into it. I think what happens is we're focusing on culture and we're focusing on people, and then HR have their own objectives around processes and performance management, and we're not coming together and melding the two. And I think we have to be able to do that and be better partners. So that's what I think we can do. Get in a room. I'm always a fan of getting in a room, figuring out who does what, how we add value to each other, because we do, and then creating a plan around that, and then checking ourselves.
I echo everything you just said. Start with HR.
Absolutely. And there's amazing partnerships that can happen. One scenario that I've seen play out time and time again is you have, we represent various communities across the organization, right? We amplify voice, we provide safe spaces, all the things. And sometimes HR is looked at as, well, I can't trust HR, right? There's a real opportunity to build bridges there. So for example, we have like a safe space conversation, confidential way to book an appointment with me, my team. But we always loop HR into thematics, that themes that we're seeing, not necessarily specifics, because we treat that safely. And on the flip side, HR brings us into those harder conversations where they might be finding bias and need some advice and guidance on how to manage that. So if you can make it work and build those bridges, I think it can be really successful. But sometimes it's viewed as a competition. Different priorities, you're adding more work to my plate, but you have to work through that for the company's success.
And we're going to go back to the mentoring question, or the mentoring topic. So there was a question that came in from the audience. Mentoring seems to be a good way to build skills that you don't have early to mid-career. However, it seems like sponsorship is more critical as you enter a senior manager or director level role. Not sure that there are a lot of strong sponsorship programs in place to change the senior ranks. What is the group doing to help employees break through to the senior ranks?
I think one aspect that's really important is looking at the entire team and who's being developed and how are they being developed. And if we see gaps or opportunities for input, then being able to add to those lists of who's being developed and what training are they getting to help them to be ready for that next promotion or that next opportunity. And that's why when HR and DEI are working together along with the business and every leader is on board, we can incorporate those changes so that it doesn't have to be a formal sponsorship program. It's just the way that we work.
In our sponsorship program, and I think it has worked, is during our talent reviews, when we talk about talent, the sponsor has to talk about, because the goal is, I want you to, what do you say about you when you're not in the room, right? And so it is part of their performance review, every leader, that, you know, that your sponsor, that the person that you're sponsoring is successful. So we really believe that if you are paired right, if you are seen and connected in the right ways, that these are people are going to be successful. They're high potential people we've identified. And so the sponsor talks about their sponsor, you know, whatever, what's the word for sponsor? Is it sponsee? I don't know if I'm saying the word right, but they talk about their person and they talk about their strengths. And what I've seen is, even if what they also do is they give a different point of view. So example, we had a conversation and they were talking about one of the development needs of one of our high potentials. The sponsor spoke up and said, think about it this way. And that's the type of conversation you want in that room. And said, here's my experience, because here's my experience with that person. Let's go look at it again. And so I think you have to be able to talk about that talent in the space where we're trying to make those decisions about who's going to get promoted, who's going to get to the next level. And sponsors have to be accountable for speaking up in those rooms. And so that's part of their performance review, that if they take on a person that they're going to sponsor, that they put a development plan to make sure that person's successful. It's kind of like the Branch Rickey, Jackie Robinson story for us. And so I made them watch 42, by the way, before we did the sponsorship conversation. But I think that's when you start to see the different conversations come out, and you start to see some of the bias come out, and people can kind of mitigate that through the other conversation.
We had another question come in from the audience. What DEI programs do you feel are often overlooked or undervalued?
That's a great question. I think every area could be, but there's a particular power, I think, and this might be controversial, in our ERGs, our employee resource groups. But you have to give them the support that they need, right? It can't just be about, hey, we're going to do we're going to celebrate Black History Month, and then there's nothing, right? You have to be really intentional about providing the support, making sure you have executive sponsorship, et cetera. But I think those programs, those are a part of the programmatic structure that creates safe spaces, community, belonging. And it doesn't just have to be race and gender. It should be about all different types of identities and different, situations. Our caregivers network is like hugely impactful on a daily basis, right? But it's also partially because we pour in dollars and cents and we provide an opportunity for their voices to get amplified at the C-suite level. So I think ERGs, I'll just leave it at that.
I think I would say the same thing. I think ERGs could be incredibly powerful. I think people see them sometimes as social clubs. And I think you have to create this they add value to the community. They add value for a sense of belonging. It is powerful to be around a group of people who you have similar interests in when you are the only in the room. And I think that gets underlooked and undervalued when these groups get together to woosah and have a breath. I think that if you can connect what they do to the business, For instance, at Riot, our ERGs helped us design our champions and our characters. And so that was a really big benefit. And so now our characters are more diverse because of the input, and they resonate with the intended audience. And so really connecting them to that and amplifying that to leaders who may have a different view of what ERGs are. So I agree with Nickoria 100%.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Sharra.
Yeah, I'll just add, in agreement with both of you. I think, ERGs and any group or activity that's focusing on the inclusion piece of it. And this speaks to a little bit about what I talked about earlier, right? About bringing in, the discussion around diversity, right? Because we want to be able to report on, we have this many of this group and we've grown by that. But really looking at those groups that focus on the inclusion piece, I think that's lost. And also anything that's driving sort of the evaluation around equity and what it really means. And I'll repeat this again, because I think this is really a really important piece. When we talk about equity, are we talking about giving people what they need to thrive in an environment that exists that truly isn't friendly for everyone? Right? So I think those pieces that drive on equity, that drive on inclusion, are often overlooked because the gaze is squarely on diversity.
Thanks, everyone. The next question we want to address is just came in from the audience as well. From a mentoring perspective, how do you navigate the workplace as a Black woman, use your voice loudly and unapologetically, and avoid the stereotype of being an angry Black woman?
Ooh, I got feels about this question, so I'm gonna go last. So I want to hear from my sisters what they think.
No, I a couple of things here. So I've always worked in tech, so it's been, highly dominated by white male executives. A lot of them don't even know about the stereotype. My first thing is education and storytelling, right? I know that for me and my journey at my age that I am and where I'm at in my career, I'm very comfortable using my voice. And so what I try to do through mentorship and through connecting down in my organization is, help provide that support, that's okay, right? But you also have to change the culture. If it's an unwritten kind of fear of having hard conversations or listening to voices in an open way, you have to start there with education and try to shift that mindset and that heart place of those folks that actually think that way every time you open your mouth. It's hard. It's a hard journey, but I think being honest about it, storytelling, and then providing that mentoring to those young Black women in your organization is very important. That's kind of all I got.
I think it's really important for those of us who might be in leadership to speak up. And when Nickoria said, the mentorship, I think part of that mentorship is listening to what's being said about employees. And if there is an employee who is not in the room and someone's saying she's angry and she's always, let's talk about what you are giving as a tone bias to someone. And just the way she speaks, it doesn't necessarily mean she's angry, and she might be right. Let's listen to her. And we need to be able to have that conversation among our leadership. And that is where representation really matters, because if there is no one in the room who can talk about tone bias, then it happens, that you're the angry Black woman and no one's listening to you. So the diversity of the room at all representative levels matters, and that when we are in the room, we've got to be able to speak up. We have to use our voice, because without that inclusion, we will never get to the true opportunity that really exists for companies to do this work well.
Early on in my career, I took a class in diversity. This is in the 90s, and it was communication styles of Black people and white people. It was a really interesting class. It was in the 90s. And I was rejecting most of it. But one thing that I took to heart and I still think about today is they talk about Black women, and our style of communication is truth before peace. And people like to be communicated to peace before truth. And so one of the things that I'm always aware of, I mean, I don't know if I avoid I've been called intimidating, I've been called all the intimidating, I've been called those things, and I've been called direct. And so when I reflect and go, I'm going to be direct. If your shoes are red, I can only say your shoes are red. But if I'm off-putting, let's have that conversation. So I think it's unpacking kind of what that stereotype is and having that conversation to people who are open to having it, because I'm open to having it. I think I spent a lot of my career trying to say things in which that it didn't land in a wrong way. I mean, we are so uber aware, I think, of how we are speaking, that when someone gives that trope, I know that's not true because we are always thinking about it. And so I find it helpful. I think Nickoria talked about, how do I unpack? I go in curiosity. I ask questions around that. What was it about that interaction? What I don't do is own it. I think because I'm of a certain generation as well, and I have spent my whole life being self-aware of what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and I just try to unpack it. And it's a thing where it's communication if people are open to listening. But also I've built relationships strongly around that if someone were to say that, they're like, well, that's not my experience with her. And so what I find is when I'm called that, it's something that I've said that maybe was right and people didn't like to hear it. But it's great to have mentors and sponsors and relationships that speak for you when you're not in a room. Because if you don't have that, then that trope sticks. So if you do have that, then there's someone in the room saying, yeah, that's not my experience. And that's kind of where you want to get to. Then that's how I navigate through that.
Another question that just came in from the audience, what are the group's thoughts about the fact that 90% of chief diversity officer jobs are only held by Black or African Americans in the US? Do you think that it is the state of mind or blind spot in the corporate space with regards to the lack of representation within corporations on what diversity is about?
First of all, I question the 90%. I'm not sure that's right. I think that's pretty high. And I believe that anyone who occupies the space of leading diversity for an organization, I would hope that they are aware of potential blind spots they have, because our job is to represent employees and to represent the company. And so I don't necessarily understand all of where this question is coming from, but I know that as a Black woman, when I am discussing diversity, I'm not discussing it just for hire more Black women, hire more women, or hire more Black people. I am looking at the diversity that we have and how can we integrate that throughout the organization. And that may mean people with varied abilities, that may mean people who are LGBTQ. And I believe that the bonus of being me is that I come into the room and I'm looking to see who's there. And whoever isn't there and who can be a cultural add is what I want us to get to.
Yeah, and I'll add, I don't come from a typical, HR people-focused background, right? I was in tech and consulting all my life. I wanted this role. That's why I'm here. Right? I wanted to make an impact and make change. And because of my walk almost. So I think if you see more of us there, it could also be because this is where our passion is. And you want the most passionate people in these particular roles. So just adding that to the mix.
I'd like clarification on the question, because the latest statistic that I've heard was actually that I think it's 81% of chief diversity officers are white. So I can't speak to this question until that's clarified. It's not my understanding that that's the statistic.
Thanks, Sharra. We'll wait to see if the individual that submitted that question provides some additional context. But there was a follow-up to the mentoring question that I'd like to ask. Any thoughts on how to do this when the leadership is mostly Black women and that they are the ones policing other Black women's voices?
I would say to that person, call me offline. Let's have a discussion around, because I'm interested in that. So you got my LinkedIn, call me offline. Because it seems like that's a specific thing that's happening. I have not experienced that, but, and I certainly, as a Black woman, as a Black women leader, will always, my goal is to amplify voices. So would love to have that conversation offline. That rest can answer it, but I think that's a mentoring opportunity, I think.
And we had a question come in from earlier that I'd like to address with the group, and this really gets at the hierarchy and reporting structure. So how do you challenge or convince executives to champion DEI initiatives, especially if you don't report directly into the CEO?
I think that there is strength in numbers. And so if you are one person and you are the only person who cares about DEI in the organization and you don't report to the CEO, then it will be somewhat of a struggle. If you can at least get some leaders to buy in with you, then now you've got a voice and now you've got some momentum. And I believe that there's power in being able to have a voice, a unified voice, wherever you find that. And if you are one Asian employee and you can find a Hispanic employee and you can find a person with varied abilities, now you've got a coalition. And so I think it's important that you can represent more than just your voice in speaking to leadership.
I agree with that, Nina, and I think that is the strength in allyship, regardless of, find other leaders in the organization who may have the CEO's ear or who are influential in the organization, and build those who bring them in, ask them to participate, ask them to see and look under the covers of how effective DEI can be. And I know that that has worked for me, allyship within other ELT members or other influential leaders in the organization, and those who may not have the ear of the CEO. I believe that's true too, Nina, right? Building coalitions and having various voices come from different directions.
And the last question that we want to cover on today's session, and Nina, we'll start with you. What would you like to see achieved in 2023 and beyond from a DEI perspective?
I would love to see renewed vigor towards DEI goals. I would love to see companies really embrace it from the leadership perspective to say, we're going to incorporate this into everything that we do. And our culture is going to change and we are going to be inclusive and really start to explore equity from every aspect. I'd love to see us go beyond the surface conversations that we may have had before and oh, okay, well, we did this and that's enough. I want us to keep going. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is an ever evolving opportunity, as Angela said earlier in our conversation. And there is no limit to what we can do in organizations. And I'd love for us to really start to really get closer to some of that potential.
Nina, I can't add anything to what you said. I really just can't. I think you are so spot on. If I was going to say anything, I would like us not to be afraid of it and to lean into it. I think part of what's happening is that we're afraid to talk about these hard conversations, and we can do it. And so I echo you said it beautifully. And I just would add, let's get the fear out of it and have the real conversation, because that's the only way we move forward.
And I love that first statement, the renewed vigor. If anything, in 2023, I want to abolish DE&I fatigue. I'm so tired of hearing about that. And it is one of the most frustrating things, because it feels like organizations have this stance of, how do we turn it down a notch? We did really good in 2020 and 2021. Now I think we're okay. So going into it actually needs to be the opposite, right? I want to see that renewed vigor, as you said. I think that's so important.
Agreed, 100%. And with that rigor, I'd love to see, or vigor, for both, right?
Wrong word, sorry.
It's to have the fundamentals, right? For us to stop asking the first question that we responded to today, which is still out there, which is, how does it affect the bottom line? Sort of why is it important? Let's move past that. Let's give our chief diversity officers funding. Let's give them a budget. Let's give them staff, right? As Angela talked about, let's establish DEI as a strategic imperative, right? And have this very fundamental, the CFO is responsible for the financial health of the organization, right? Managers have a budget. They're given a budget. There's accountability. Let's have accountability across the organization. It's everyone's responsibility. It's not the chief diversity officer, and make that clear throughout the organization. And I think that will make a path, really move out some of the clutter, and create a path towards success. Let's get the fundamentals out of the way.
Well, I'd like to share a very special thank you to our panelists today for a very educational and informative discussion. Feel free to scan their QR code to connect with them on LinkedIn. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for past events, including the Halo series and mini series, where we feature thought leaders in a one-on-one setting as they discuss what is keeping them up at night. And thank you everyone for joining. Please keep an eye out for the survey request early next week, and we will have a version uploaded to our YouTube channel on Monday, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.